pensions and savings at Interactive Investor, and welcome to the first episode in a new retirement-focused podcast, Pensions Unpacked, where James Jones-Tinsley, who is technical specialist at Barnett Waddingham, the pension consultants, and I, like polyfiller, attempt to fill in your pension knowledge gaps. For this one, we're going to unpack the sometimes painful, often off-putting and very complex jargon that has sprung up like Japanese knotweed in the world of pensions. Like Tarzan, James will hack back the terminology to reveal the blooms of glorious retirement knowledge beneath. And for fun, he's going to do so against the clock, which I'm going to start and stop after 2 minutes on each topic. James loves a challenge, luckily. Thank you, James, for being such a willing volunteer.
That's okay. Thank you very much, Becky. I do think with pensions, really, you should be able to explain what a pension is in under 2 minutes anyway, just like an ISA or something like that. And the fact that you can't is testament to all the layers of regulation and legislation that we have to grapple through.
Absolutely. And if we can't do it, then they must change the terminology straight away. So we've got 10 topics to cover today, and we're going to give 2 minutes for each, and maybe enough time for you to catch your breath at the end of each, but maybe not, we'll see. If James manages each in less than 2 minutes, great. We all get a little bit of our lives back. I can't imagine what else you'd want to do besides watching a retirement podcast. Here goes. James, what is the difference between a private or personal pension and a workplace pension?
Okay, private or personal pensions are, as the name suggests, a pension that is owned in the name of one person. They have been around for many years. You can in fact trace them right back to the 1960s, and some of the viewers may have what's called a retirement annuity contract or a Section 226 policy. They both mean the same thing. They were typically there for self-employed people or partners in a partnership, and then in 1988 we had the birth of the new style personal pension plan. That ultimately also came to stakeholder pensions in 2001, and since then as well we've also had the growth of self-invested personal pensions or SIPs. Workplace pensions, as the name suggests, are pensions set up by an employer for their employees. They have particularly increased in number since 2012 when auto-enrolment started, and there are now well in excess of 10 million people enrolled in workplace pensions. The typical type of workplace pension these days is known as a master trust, which is a multi-employer money purchase occupational pension scheme.
Multi-employer money purchase. We've got 30 seconds. Tell me what money purchase means.
Money purchase is a way of saving money. Effectively, you put money into a pot or a bucket, if you like, and save that up until you come to your retirement or date of wanting to access the fund, and then you can basically use that to take pension benefits from.
Brilliant. 1 minute 53 for our first topic. Excellent start. Well done, James. Okay, so swiftly moving on. Resetting the clock. James, 3, 2, 1. What's the difference between the new state pension and the basic state pension?
Okay, the new state pension started from the 6th of April 2016 for people who attain their state pension age on or after that date. It is a flat rate pension, so there is one figure rather than a combination of different amounts, and for the current tax year, the full rate is £179.06 per week. The actual amount you receive will depend upon your national insurance contribution record during your working lifetime. The basic state pension was the forerunner of the new state pension, often referred to in older times as the old age pension. It was originally launched, believe it or not, in 1908 by the Lloyd George government, came into effect from the 1st of January 1909, and at that time the payment was between 10p and 25p a week in new money to people of good character, aged 70 or over. So clearly things have changed since then. The people who receive their basic state pension, those who attained state pension age before 6th of April 2016, the full rate at the moment is £137.60 per week. And the difference here is that if you were an employee, you also have the option to build up a second tier of state pension, which was known as SERPS, or the State Earnings Revalued Pension Scheme, from 1978, and then it became, in the early noughties, the State Second Pension, or S2P. So whereas the new state pension is a flat rate, there is the potential for somebody to have two amounts in their overall basic state pension.
1 minute 58. That is brilliant. Right on the nose. Well done, James. I love that we're introducing some of the history of the state pension system and some key dates as well. It's brilliant.
Well, true, and that is what it said. You had to be of good character to get a state pension when it first started in the early 20th century. So there we go.
Okay. Question 3. I reckon you're going to do this in 1 minute, but let's see. What is pension credit?
Well, I could spend 2 hours on pension credit because there's so much around it in terms of eligibility and one thing and how you get it and all that sort of thing. But in a nutshell, it gives you extra money, extra income to help you with your living costs if you are aged over the state pension age and you are on a low income. It is separate. It's a separate payment from your state pension, and you can receive it even if you've got other income, savings, or your own house. Now, if you are eligible for pension credit, what it then does is it tops up your weekly income to currently £177.10 if you are single, or £270.30 as a joint weekly amount if you have a partner. Now, in terms of the amount, there is also a whole raft of extra weekly payments available for your situation. For example, if you have a severe disability, if you're caring for another adult, if you're responsible for children or young people who are aged under 20, if you've got housing costs, and even if you have some savings. You also, if you qualify for pension credit, you do automatically receive other payments, including cold weather payments, certain NHS costs, and perhaps probably most importantly, given what's happened in recent times, you are still eligible for a free TV licence if you're 75 or over.
Okay, that was brilliant. That was 1 minute 43. Very good. And just quickly thinking about pension credit, would you suggest that most people check to see whether they're eligible for it? If in doubt, is it best to check?
Yes, absolutely. And I would recommend that they contact the Department for Work and Pensions as a starting point.
It's an underused benefit, isn't it? Not as many people actually take the credit as are eligible for it.
And there's so much to it, which is why I was sort of slightly jokingly at the start saying how long I could spend on this, because it is in depth. There is a lot there to sort of plough through. So the best thing I would say is just to try and make contact with somebody at the DWP, and hopefully they will guide you through what is available to you based upon your personal situation.
Absolutely, really important. Okay, moving on to question 4. This is one that I think people often get confused. Ready to go with, what is the difference between defined contribution and defined benefit?
Okay. Defined benefit, I'm going to start talking historically again. Defined benefit pension schemes are very much the foundation of the British pension scheme system, which arguably you could say started with the civil service pension scheme. And a phrase that was often used until more recently in connection with defined benefit schemes were final salary schemes. And these were typically occupational pension schemes ones that are set up by an employer for their employees, and there is a formula which ultimately dictates how much pension that person receives when they get to their normal retirement date under the pension scheme. Now, in the olden days, it tended to be 60 as the normal retirement date, and there was an expectation you could build up to 40 years worth of accrual in the scheme. 40/60ths, you can simplify that down to 2/3, and the old Inland Revenue maximum pension was 2/3 of your final salary, which is why they were known as final salary schemes, on the basis that your final salary before you retired was typically the highest salary that you had ever received in your working lifetime. Now, as the years have gone by, they are very much in the decline, especially in the private sector. There are still public sector schemes available. Defined contribution are, if you like, the newer kids on the block, and this defined contribution is another way of saying money purchase, which is what we talked about earlier. So effectively, rather than having a formula that ultimately then gives you a known pension and potentially tax-free cash sum at your normal retirement date, here you and your employer are putting money into effectively a pot over time, and then ultimately the size of that pot will dictate what your pension benefits are. So there's more into the unknown with defined contribution rather than defined benefit.
Okay, so we went over with that one, James, but that's okay. You did 2 minutes and 14 seconds. And the reason that's okay is that we did also sort of go into the next question, which is around money purchase and final salary, and also introducing the other term, which is career average. I think it's really interesting that you explained there that final salary doesn't mean that you receive your final salary on an ongoing annual basis once you retire. It is based on your final salary, which is something that I think is worth clarifying. And clearly, there's some issues around the generosity of defined contribution versus defined benefit, which we don't need to go into now. But you have some bonus time for this next question because you've already fitted in quite a lot of it. But let's talk about career average and see how quickly you can explain this one to us. Ready, you go.
Okay. Career average revalued earnings schemes, or CARE schemes, are the newer versions of the old final salary defined benefit occupational pension scheme. Putting it in a nutshell, they are cheaper to run and they cost less. And I think the biggest issue with final salary schemes over time is basically how expensive they have become to basically fund. And it is typically the employer who will fund the larger part of it. And so, without getting into the sort of depths of the historical side of things, what happened was there has been a gradual shift away from final salary defined benefit pension schemes over to CARE, career average revalued earnings schemes. And the reason why they don't cost as much, if I can put it that way, is because, as the name suggests, your ultimate pension formula takes into account an average of all the earnings that you have received over your career. And typically, and hopefully, those earnings would sort of, go up like that over time, but clearly the average will allow for the older ones as well. So the overall pension benefits you receive are likely to be lower than they would have been if it had been based on your final salary. And then, as we've said with money purchase, there are effectively three things that dictate how much your pension will be at the end of your saving and before you start to turn those benefits on and retire: the amount of money going in, what the money is actually invested in, and the investment returns that you receive over the term of the investment. And then ultimately at the other end, if you are using your pension fund to buy an annuity, which I know we're coming to, it would be whatever the annuity rates are at that time. So there's a lot of unknowns there, whereas with final salary and care schemes, you have a known formula, so it is possible to almost calculate your pension accrual over time and be pretty sure about what it's going to be at the end of the day. And that is why you often see these type of schemes referred to as gold-plated, because they do give you, as far as is possible, and nothing in life is guaranteed, a promise of a future pension benefit and tax-free cash sum.
It's worth saying, though, isn't it, that these slightly more generous gold-plated schemes aren't generally available. Reiterating that, you said it earlier, and you'd probably have to take a job in the civil service or another public sector organisation if you wanted one.
Yes, I mean it is really now. It is the public sector where you do see these schemes continuing, and there were elements or attempts made to reduce the cost of running these, because some of these schemes, I hasten to add, are unfunded, so they are ultimately paid by the government and you and I as taxpayers as well, and the figures are quite staggering when you actually look at how much they cost. So there have been attempts over the last decade to try and amend them in terms of their accrual, in order to make them more cost effective for the government, but that's all come unstuck in recent times because the government lost a High Court ruling saying that there was age discrimination in what they were trying to do, and now they're trying to put that right.
Total can of worms, that one, isn't it? So swiftly moving on. Question 6. We are over halfway. Woohoo! And I'm going to reset my stopwatch. We're going on to retirement options. And James, what is the difference between drawdown and an annuity?
Okay, I'll take annuity first if I may, because that's probably the easiest one to explain. Annuities have been around since time immemorial. It basically is Latin for an annual amount of money, and I think even Jane Austen uses the word in one of her novels. It's that old. But the basic concept is you have, and I'm typically thinking here about personal pension plans, you accrue a pot of money in that plan under, say, a money purchase basis, and you then give that pot of money to an annuity provider who in return gives you, in most cases, a known guaranteed income payable to you every year for the rest of your life. So it's similar in a way to a scheme pension from a defined benefit pension scheme that we've been talking about. Drawdown first emerged in the mid-90s, and what it said is you don't have to take your pension pot, hand it over to an annuity provider. What you can do is you can keep that fund invested, and you can then draw down an amount of money from it when you want to. So you don't have to be drawing down the same amount every year. You can if you want to, but you don't have to. There's a lot more flexibility, and effectively you are continuing to shoulder the investment risk because the fund remains invested. Whereas with an annuity, there's no risk because you're handing it over to another party and they're giving you a known income in return. The risk is how big that income is, and there's a lot of factors that play into determining what the actual income amount is that you receive. Drawdown, if we've got time, has changed. It's gone through a lot of changes over the last 20 years or so, 25 years, particularly in 2015 when we had something called the pension freedoms, and there were other changes along the way as well in terms of the name given to it and the various terms and conditions that apply to drawdown. But it does remain now probably the most popular way of taking retirement benefits. It's overtaken annuities, which were the most popular option until probably about 6 or 7 years ago.
2 minutes 19. Well done, James. Slightly there, but that was my fault. I mean, of course, it's worth saying, isn't it, that annuity, one of the reasons drawdown is so popular now is that annuity rates tend to be pretty poor.
Oh, they have been, definitely, yes. Yeah, probably. I mean, it's often said that in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, you could look to an annuity rate of 10%, whereas now really we're down to as low as 1 to 2%, depending upon the shape of your annuity and all the whistles and bells that you're adding in. I think it's very much linked to what's happening in the economy and gilt yields. So as gilt yields have fallen over the last couple of decades, really, annuity rates have gone south with them. But I think there are still, I would always say this, there are always situations where it can be the most appropriate retirement option for somebody given their situation.
Yes, absolutely. The higher premium, though, for the security of the guaranteed income. Okay, now this is one of my favourite terms in pensions, just because it sounds very pretty, but it's actually probably less pretty than it sounds in reality. I'm starting my clock, James, on what on earth is crystallized and uncrystallized pensions?
Okay. There are a number of key dates in pensions history, and one of the more recent key dates is the 6th of April 2006, which is colloquially called A Day. And on A Day, all the pension tax rules that hitherto we'd had to grapple with were swept away and replaced with effectively one set of rules for all different types of pension schemes. And thinking about drawdown, drawdown was around before A Day, and in terms of looking at turning your pension fund into pounds and pence in your pocket, the phrase that tended to be used was vesting. And so you could have an unvested pension pot because you'd not attacked it yet, if you like. If you had a vested pension pot, it meant that you had fully turned on your pension benefits and were receiving them in some shape or form. Now, A Day brought in a full range of new words, of which one was uncrystallized and the other was crystallized. And uncrystallized is like unvested. So what it means is that you've not actually started to take any benefits at all from your pension fund. Crystallized is the opposite. It means that you've actually started to take benefits from your pension fund. So your pension fund is crystallized, but I agree it's not really an appropriate word because that fund could still remain invested. In many cases it does, and so it could still grow. So it's not sort of set in stone as an amount necessarily. It could go up or down, but that's the basic difference between the two. So sorry, nothing to do with crystals, I'm afraid, Becky. It's just HMRC's way of determining whether you've started to take benefits from your pension fund or not.
1 minute 57, absolutely brilliant. I think we do need to work on another analogy for that process, but I'll have a think about that later. Okay, right. Question 8. Is this everybody's favourite acronym? Please can you explain what offplus, UFPLS means?
Yeah. Well, pensions is absolutely riddled with acronyms, and this is one of the newer ones. And another key date in pensions history is the 6th of April 2015, when a concept called pensions freedoms were introduced, and along with a change in drawdown at that time to flexi access drawdown, which replaced cap drawdown and flexible drawdown, offplus was introduced as yet another way of accessing your fund or some of your pension fund. Now, I don't know who dreamt it up, but it must have been a good party that night. But anyway, it does stand for uncrystallized funds pension lump sum. So thinking about what we were talking about a couple of minutes ago, what it's effectively saying is it's taking a lump sum out of your uncrystallized funds that you have within your pension scheme. And the difference is that lump sum will actually be made up of two separate components. A quarter of it, or 25% of it, will be in the shape of tax-free cash. The other remaining 75% of it will be in the form of taxable pension income. But what you can do is you can do a series of offpluses over time. So you can leave the remainder of your pension fund uncrystallized and invested and just draw down a certain amount every year until all of your pension fund has been crystallized. But it's, in my experience, it's not been very popular. I've not, seen a lot of people doing it. I think flexi access drawdown is by far and away the most favourite option now, with annuities and offplus sort of following in its wake.
Okay.
Not everybody is eligible for an offplus, if I can just fit that one in.
Yes, absolutely. Do you want to explain that a little bit? It's over the 2 minutes, but that's fine. It's worth it.
Yeah, it very much, and I know we're coming on to this shortly, but it's all very much down to your own personal situation and whether you have a certain form of protection over your pension scheme, or whether your pension scheme includes certain types of rights, usually arising from divorce. So without going into too much, more detail, there are certain situations where you're not eligible to take an offplus.
Question 9. There's a few acronyms that you've got to pack in here. Sorry about this. This is the most challenging question.
We'll get my trainers on for this one. Okay.
Okay, we've got annual allowance,
Yep.
money purchase annual allowance, and lifetime allowance, all in 2 minutes.
Off we go. Okay, annual allowance is the maximum amount of contributions that you and or your employer can contribute to your pension each tax year. And the actual size of the annual allowance, the basic size is £40,000 gross per tax year, but there are exceptions to that, in that if your salary is less than 40,000, you can contribute up to 100% of your salary. If you're not earning at all, you can still contribute up to 3,600 a year, and you may be subject to what's called the tapered annual allowance, which will serve to drive down the maximum amount. Money purchase annual allowance was something else that came about with the pension freedoms, and basically what it means is that if you flexibly access, and that's HMRC's phrase, your defined contribution pension scheme or money purchase pension scheme, then you will be then subject to a lower annual allowance, which currently stands at £4,000 gross per annum. So a massive reduction if otherwise you'd be entitled to the 40,000 a year. And the lifetime allowance is like a ceiling on the amount of tax efficient pension contributions that you can, and fund that you can build up over time. Now at the moment there is a standard lifetime allowance of a ridiculously unrounded figure of £1,073,100, which is due to remain frozen until the 5th of April 2026. There are exceptions to that through a number of protection regimes, which I think is definitely a topic for another day, Becky.
Absolutely. And of course, all these things are subject to, changes by the government.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
All the rest is a hot topic, isn't it, at the moment?
They are the current rates that I've quoted, but as you quite rightly say, and it certainly happened historically, the amounts were far, far higher once upon a time, but then were reduced down largely as part of the government's austerity programme.
So, question 10, nearly there, and you're probably near the bottom of your water glass now, but hopefully this won't be too taxing. I know it's a favourite topic of yours at the moment. James, finally, what are investment pathways and should people use them?
Okay, right. Investment pathways is something that the Financial Conduct Authority have introduced with effect from February this year. It was meant to be August last year, but the pandemic decided otherwise. And these came about as a result of a long programme or project that the FCA were running, which they called their Retirement Outcomes Review. And this was very much looking in the rearview mirror at what had happened in terms of what people were doing once the pension freedoms had come in 2015. So the Retirement Outcomes Review ran broadly from 2016 to 2019, and the main conclusion that the FCA reached was that too many people were going into flexi access drawdown without first seeking independent financial advice, and a lot of people were holding all of their drawdown fund in cash. And their conclusion was that this basically put these people at the risk of harm from a financial perspective, and so their solution was to come up with a series of 4 investment pathways whereby people would be able to choose which of the 4 pathways they wish their drawdown fund to be invested into. And broadly speaking, they span a 5-year term, and the questions are along the lines of, do you intend to take your money very quickly, or are you just going to hold on to it for at least 5 years? And depending upon which pathway they go down, there is then a multi-asset investment fund available, which is in accordance, if you like, with their objectives. In terms of whether it's right for you, I don't want to stray into advice. It's definitely something that you will have to address along with your advisor if you have one. I think it's early days yet, but what I'm seeing is that they're not actually being taken up that much by a lot of people. But as I say, it's very early days.
Absolutely. Well, that's brilliant and right on the nose. 10 seconds over, but I'll give you that because
Thank you.
You have met this challenge absolutely brilliantly. I bow down to you for taking it on. I love the historical references, and I think it does help to contextualize some of this. If you look at the dates and why things were introduced, sort of as an evolving process, trying to get pensions right. Correcting mistakes in policy and that kind of thing. You can see it forming over the century, really, can't you?
Very much so, yes. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And James, I really hope you're up for another one of these and it hasn't exhausted you.
I'll go for a lie down and a satsuma now, but I'll be ready for another one soon.
Excellent. Well, I'm very much looking forward to the next one. I think that was really useful and condensed, abridged version of a summary of the entire pensions universe, really. So brilliant. Well done. Thank you.
Thank you, Becky.
Thank you so much for watching. If you found this podcast useful, please like and subscribe for more, and don't forget to check out other brilliant podcasts and shows from Interactive Investor. We'll go into all the nooks and crannies over the coming months, keeping things as simple as humanly possible. Thanks again to James, and bye for now.